In Pokrovsk, additional forces from the Special Unit Timur broke through a land corridor to the GUAR Special Forces, who had taken up new positions the day before following a successful airborne operation. This was reported by the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. The agency emphasized that fierce fighting with Russian occupiers is ongoing in one of the districts of Pokrovsk. The main task of the defense forces is to prevent the Russian Federation's army from disrupting the supply of Ukrainian units. The Security Service of Ukraine has eliminated 1,500 Russian soldiers in the Pokrovsk direction. These are the results of the work carried out by the fighters of the Alpha Special Operations Center over the past month. In addition, the agency notes that the units destroy enemy equipment on a daily basis. They have already accounted for 20 tanks, 62 armored vehicles, as well as 40 Russian artillery systems and MLRS. Watch further to learn about the situation on this and other sections of the front.
Ukrainian intelligence fighters dropped 100 kilograms of explosives on Russian drone operators. The scouts discovered the headquarters of the Russian occupiers from the so-called Rubicon Center in Avdiivka, Donetsk region, and skillfully directed drones with explosives in the midst of dense urban development. According to the GUAR, Rubicon is one of the most combat-capable structures of the Russian occupation army, on which Russia spends significant resources.
As a result of the strike, the officers and drone operators of the Russian Rubicon who were in the headquarters were eliminated. The main intelligence directorate of Ukraine reminds, for every war crime committed against the Ukrainian people, there will be just retribution. From a statement by the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine on Telegram,
since the beginning of the day, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has counted 103 clashes along the entire front line. On the Slovyansk section of the front, the defense forces repelled 12 enemy attacks. The Russians attempted to storm the Oleksandrivka section of the front 9 more times. And in the Kostyantinivka direction, Ukrainian armed forces soldiers stopped another 7 attempts by the Russian army to break through Ukrainian defenses. Almost a quarter of all battles since the beginning of the day took place in the Pokrovsk direction. The Russians stormed Ukrainian positions 27 times in the areas of 15 settlements.
According to various average estimates, there are about 100,000 Russian occupation troops around the city of Pokrovsk. All of this that's happening right now is an attempt to buy some time, because the pressure is indeed very serious. And for 13 months in a row, as we've discussed, the city's defenders have been doing simply unimaginable things in terms of defense. Because according to all the canons, according to all the plans of the Russian Federation, the city was supposed to have been captured back in September or October of 2024.
In the southern Slobozansky direction, the Ukrainian armed forces have repelled 7 enemy attacks since the beginning of the day. In particular, the Russian army continues its attempts to break through from the north into the city of Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region. But analysts call these assaults nothing more than a diversionary maneuver.
Putin's main goal is the Donetsk, Luhansk region. As of today, if he hasn't yet completely gone crazy here. Everything else is a distraction, not giving us the opportunity to regroup somewhere, to strengthen, for example, the Pokrovsk direction there. But I want to reassure them that we have enough forces and resources to eliminate, to capture, so that we have someone to exchange for our prisoners, both military and civilians, who are currently in Russian prisons.
The Russians continue to advance in the Chasiv Yar area with small assault groups using motorcycles, aviation and artillery. This was reported by the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade named after King Danilo. Over the past week in this area alone, the Russian army has lost nearly 100 soldiers. 294 drones of various types have been destroyed, as well as an electronic warfare system, a ground robotic complex, and 3 communication antennas. In total, over the past day, the defense forces have eliminated 840 Russian occupiers. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia's total combat losses since the start of the full-scale war have already exceeded 1,145,000 soldiers. In addition, yesterday, 5 Russian tanks, 1 armored combat vehicle, 42 artillery systems, and more than 90 units of automotive equipment were destroyed.
The president of Ukraine on the front line, Volodymyr Zelensky, met with the fighters of the National Guard's Rubezh Rapid Response Brigade. Together with adjacent units, they are holding the defense in the Dobropilya direction. The president listened to the commander's report on the situation at this section of the front and discussed the brigade's needs. Zelensky also visited the command post of the National Guard's 1st Corps Azov in the Dobropilya area. They discussed the necessary weaponry with the command, and the best fighters were awarded state honors. The president also visited the Pokrovsk area. He met with the soldiers of the 25th Separate Airborne Sikoslav Brigade, which is holding the defense at this section of the front.
Wishing you good health.
I wish you good health. Dear warriors, it is an honor for me to be here today to thank you for your service for defending Ukraine. Thank you for your daily work, your service, for protecting the life of the entire nation. President Zelensky also spoke with the soldiers about urgent needs and first and foremost about drones. Zelensky emphasized that the majority of resources are being allocated specifically to drones and their components. And this is the right priority. After all, it is drones that help the brigades of the armed forces of Ukraine steadfastly hold the defensive line and disrupt all the plans of the Russian occupiers.
The Russian army, not for the first time.
The Russian army has already been forced more than once to postpone the deadlines for the capture they had envisioned for our Pokrovsk, for our Dobropilia. And every Russian loss specifically in these directions in Donetsk region, on the border with our Dnipropetrovsk region, as well as in Kupiansk, every Russian loss is a contribution to our ability to defend the state, to protect our people, our independence.
Ukraine has already received almost 150,000 requests from families of Russian occupiers who have gone missing in the war. According to the Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War, in October of this year alone, the presence of 159 soldiers in Ukrainian captivity was confirmed, whose relatives had submitted requests on the I Want to Find portal. Among them are not only Russians, but also citizens of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Belarus, and even Egypt. Notably, according to the Russian Federation's Commissioner for Human Rights, throughout the entire year 2025, the Russian side managed to locate only 300 missing persons.
Since the very beginning of the full-scale war, the Russian authorities have completely ignored the losses and the large number of missing among their own military personnel. That is why Russians are forced to search for their loved ones on their own and turn to the I Want to Find project. For example, in October 2025 alone, the project received 9,243 requests. That's about 300 inquiries per day. And now a message from the Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War on Telegram.
A unique rescue operation. The armed forces of Ukraine evacuated a Ukrainian soldier who, with a tourniquet applied, spent 33 days surrounded. According to the 1st Separate Medical Battalion, it was only on the 7th attempt that they managed to extract the severely wounded soldier from a settlement captured by the Russians. He was evacuated using a ground-based robotic system with an armored capsule. It was this capsule that saved the soldier from a Russian drone attack during the evacuation. The medics say that in addition, the robot ran over an anti-personnel mine, but even with a damaged wheel, it was still able to deliver the wounded man. The soldier has already received medical assistance, his treatment is ongoing, and his life is no longer in danger. On the night of Tuesday, one of the largest oil refineries in Russia, which supplied fuel to the Moscow region among others, was attacked by drones. The Lukoil Nizhny Novgorod Neftorg synthase plant was burning and exploding. According to sources from Freedom in the main intelligence directorate, CHUAR, dozens of drones were used in the strike, more than 50 of which were Ukrainian-made. I should note that just last night, Ukraine's defense forces attacked the Saratov oil refinery, as well as Russian logistics in the occupied territories. A new era has begun in the war as Ukrainian drones can now strike targets deep within the Russian Federation.
Ukraine is successfully continuing its campaign of drone strikes on Russia's strategic facilities. On the night of November 3rd, as a result of a strike on the oil refinery in Saratov, a fire broke out at the facility. A hit was recorded in the area of the oil refining units. Let me remind you, the Saratov plant is one of the oldest in Russia. As of 2023, it was processing almost 5 million tons of oil per year. And it's not just Saratov. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported strikes on a number of Russian army logistics facilities.
Fire damage was also inflicted on the occupiers' logistics facilities in the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk region. In particular, a warehouse of material and technical supplies was hit in the settlement of Roskoshnue, as well as a mobile stock of fuel and lubricants in Dolzhansk. The defense forces are systematically implementing a set of measures to strike critical elements of the military-industrial base of the terrorist state in order to deprive it of the ability to continue its aggression. From the statement of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Telegram.
On the night of November 1st, the Ukrainian Defense Forces also struck the Tuapse oil refinery in the Krasnodar region. As a result, the oil loading infrastructure of the Russian Federal Maritime Commercial Port, located on the Black Sea coast in Tuapse Bay, was hit. This terminal is one of the largest in Russia.
According to a recent review by the Carnegie Endowment, an American analytical center, Ukrainian drones have repeatedly struck 16 major Russian oil refineries, which accounts for about 38% of the country's nominal oil refining capacity. These deep strikes have given Kyiv the initiative at a crucial moment. The US and Europe are tightening sanctions against the Russian oil industry. even though Kyiv's request for American long-range Tomahawk missiles has stalled, writes Euronews.
Meanwhile, Kyiv continues to improve its own weaponry. In just 1 year, the range of Ukrainian drones has doubled from 500 kilometers to 1,000. Among the main models is the Lyuchi drone. Its production cost is about $55,000, which is dozens of times cheaper than the air defense systems Russia uses to try to shoot them down. A greater flight range allows the Ukrainian armed forces to independently strike deep into Russia, as well as change the geography of the war. Now it is no longer safe in the Russian Federation.
This is a well-calculated, precise and rational campaign aimed at weakening the Russian war machine and forcing Moscow to end the war more quickly. In the future, Ukraine's long-range arsenal will serve as a deterrent package and a guarantee against any new Russian aggression. The war that Russia unleashed against Ukraine is now returning to where it came from. And that is fair. The sooner this is understood in the Kremlin, the sooner they will make the only reasonable decision to end this war. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine.
Ukraine's enhanced long-range strike capabilities are causing real damage, forcing the Kremlin to import fuel and limit exports, the president of Ukraine stated. Volodymyr Zelensky reported that the Russians have already lost up to 20% of their gasoline supplies directly as a result of Ukrainian strikes. In addition, Volodymyr Zelensky noted that Kyiv has already used the Ukrainian cruise missile Flamingo 9 times to strike strategic targets in the Russian Federation. Let us recall its range reaches 3,000 kilometers.
The geography of sanctions is expanding. Losses of the Russian war machine are also increasing. Moreover, we are increasingly using not only Ukrainian drones but also our missiles. They are performing well. I thank our manufacturers.
Interest in the Ukrainian military technology sector is constantly growing. For example, the defense conference in Ukraine this year gathered about 5,000 investors compared to 1,000 in 2024. Foreign investors are actively investing in Ukrainian companies developing drones and defense technologies. For example, the American fund Ondas Capital announced its intention to invest at least $150 million in technologies that have been tested in combat, primarily Ukrainian ones. This was reported by the Wall Street Journal. Yulia Granovskaya for Freedom TV channel.
Insults from Russia directed at Italy will only strengthen Rome's support for Ukraine. This was stated by the head of the Italian Foreign Ministry, Antonio Tajani. He noted that a representative of the Russian embassy has already been summoned for an official reprimand following comments made to the press by Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zakharova regarding the collapse of part of the Conti Tower in Rome. Zakharova's remarks, in which she linked the accident to Rome's military support for Kyiv, were described by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs as vile and alarming, emphasizing that Italy stands with those who are fighting against aggression.
Italy will not change its foreign policy position or its sentiments because of reckless verbal attacks from Russia. All her aggressive statements only strengthen the Italian people's conviction that it is necessary to continue defending those who are under attack in an illegal and unjustified act of aggression that violates international law. Antonio Tajani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy.